Now, some people, especially Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, can't understand my taste for shoes and yell at me for snacking on them, but I always say there's no accounting for taste. For instance, remembering one evening when Mr. Monroe picked up some of his sour balls out of the bowl of his chair and dropped a green one on the floor, he didn't notice it as it rolled across the room and landed near my nose. I decided it was a perfect opportunity for me to try one for myself. I placed it in my mouth and wished immediately that I hadn't. As tears started running out of my eyes, I thought, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with my mouth? It's turning inside out. Mr. Monroe immediately noticed that something had happened. What's the matter, Harold? Are you looking for someone to kiss? Help, help! I wanted to cry, but all that came out was an ooh sound. I oohed for days. So how can anyone like these green sour balls criticize me for preferring a nice penny loafer or a bedroom slipper? But back to the matter at hand. One morning, Chester had news. That bunny, he whispered to me across out our food bowls, got out of his cage last night. Don't be ridiculous, I said. How could he break through that wire? Look at how little he is. That's just it. He didn't break through any wire. He got out of his cage without breaking anything or opening any doors. I looked puzzled, so Chester told me the following story. Now, Harold, he said, I don't want you thinking that I'm a good watch cat, because after a few hours last night I grew curious about the time. I went into the hallway, and you know that new clock that they've got, the big one that goes all the way to the ceiling? Well, see, it has this thing in the middle called a pendulum. At first I figured I would just leave it alone. It looked like that spool they tried on a string and hung up from the doorknob for me to play with when I was a kitten. Every time I hit that silly spool with my paw, it would swing back and hit me on the nose. I hated that toy. So naturally, when I saw this one, I decided not to have anything to do with it. I checked the time. It was midnight. I was all set to go back to the living room when something stopped me. Curiosity, I ventured. I suppose you could call it that. I prefer to think of it as a challenge of the unknown. I put one paw over my nose and reached out with the other and gave it a good smack. I darn near broke my arm. It's still tender. See how swollen it is? He showed me his little paw. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew better than to argue with him. Oh, yes, I said, that looks terrible. You must be suffering awfully. You'd better go easy today. He limped dramatically, just far enough to display his new handicap, and continued. I couldn't even get to the pendulum. Something had put glass in front of it. I was pretty mad, and I was all set to go back, but at the same time I couldn't help watching the thing move back and forth. Back and forth, back and forth. So easy to watch. Before I knew what happened, I was waking up. You fell asleep? I asked incredulously. I couldn't help it. I didn't even know it had happened, but I looked at the face of the clock and it was 12:45. I'd been gone 45 minutes. I ran back into the living room and looked at Bunicula's cage, and it was empty. I couldn't imagine where he was. Then I noticed a light coming from under the kitchen door. I went into a crouch, stalking the light, when click, I heard the refrigerator door close and the lights went out. It must have been Mr. Monroe having a midnight snack, I suggested. No, that's what I thought. I jumped up on my chair, curled up real quick, and kept one eye open, pretending to be asleep. Slowly, the door of the kitchen squeaked open, and the little head poked out from around the corner. Looked to either side if the coast was clear. Then, guess who came bouncing out all by himself with that idiotic grin plastered all over his face? Well, I guess it wasn't Mr. Monroe, I said. Not unless he wears bunny pajamas and gets very tiny at night. Bunicula, huh? You got it. Unfortunately, I had positioned myself so that I could see him get back into his cage. I didn't want to let him know that I had seen anything, so I had to stay put. I still don't know how he got in or out.